back in time. From the 1610s, now you're in 1471 in East England. And right now we're in the middle of a long, lengthy civil war. Who's the rightful king of England? Is it the House of York? Is it the House of Lancaster? They both have ancestry that dates back to the Plantagenets. And in 10 more years, we'll even enter a new candidate. We'll even enter the Tudors. They also go back to the Lancastrian and to the Plantagenet lines. But here we are in 1471. It's the day before Easter. And unbeknownst to us at this very moment, one more day from now will be the fated Battle of Barnet. At the moment, we are recruiting. We are part of the Paston family. I am just a servant. You can tell by my livery jacket that I'm wearing with my livery badge. I'm a servant of the Paston family, the Griffin. The Paston family is a rich family in East Anglia, nearest the town of Paston, where, of course, that gets its name from as a family. And myself, besides being a cook, right now I'm actually cooking up a pretty meager Lenten meal. You can have one meal per day during Lent, around noon. In addition to that, I'm also the crossbowman. Now, there's another gentleman in here. He is a longbowman. The family is, like I said, hiring for this upcoming skirmish with the Lancastrian family. And so I came into the service as a crossbowman. Now, in addition to this, we also have servants for the family itself. And Sonia here is demonstrating.
I am churning butter. Normally, this wouldn't have been allowed during Lent, but we had a cow birth early, and it was a steer, so we had to dispatch with it. And I managed to secure some indulgences from the bishop because I can make silk reliquary pouches in the German style, and they're pretty valuable. So I managed to get indulgences for both butter and for the milk, but all other animal products are not allowed during Lent. And I'll be doing that.
That's something that you can't eat. So milk products, so butter, cheese, you can't have anything to do with the animal itself. You can't, of course, have meat. We couldn't slaughter and eat cow. We can't eat pig, pork, chicken, anything like that. We can't have any meat of animals from Ash Wednesday through till Easter. And for those 40 days, it's a period of fasting, but specifically a period really in reference to abstinence. Fasting normally, there's like half of the year is fasting for a Catholic in the Middle Ages. Fasting normally just means you eat one meal per day. And by 1471, that meal happens right around noon. It's referred to as dinner. You can have compliments later in the evening if you've been working, like especially, I don't know, if you're anything from a monk to a farmer, you've been working really hard, you can have a little bit of bread and some water. And so there is provision for that. In Easter, around this 40 days, in Lent, I should say more specifically, it's fasting, one meal per day. But it's also abstinence, so you can't have any flesh at all on those days. So on a normal Wednesday, maybe that's a fasting day in the year, you can have, say, a little bit of beef as part of your noonday meal, but you can't have any of that. So what we're doing here for our midday meal, our dinner, is making peas porridge, and that's what's currently on the fire. It's going to take a little bit, so I started that early. And then we're also going to have roasted salmon. One of the meals that the Duke of Savoy very famously enjoyed during Lent was roasted salmon. And you can see that side by side with his normal meals, roasted beef is one of the normal meals that he enjoyed. But during Lent, everything changes over from land animals to suddenly fish. So instead of roasted beef, now he has roasted salmon. Instead of pork with sauce, now he has pike with sauce. It's almost humorous how some of these lords just transcribed all of their animal meat-based meals into fish-based. So like I said, we have roasted salmon as part of our midday meal with minty peas porridge. We're not supposed to necessarily be indulging in this great feast of a meal, and the idea is we eat to just simply survive for 4 decades until eventually he dies and puts his very young sons in charge. But if you know a little bit about Shakespeare, you know Richard III, his youngest brother, Edward's youngest brother, isn't going to let Edward's own children rule. According to Shakespeare anyways, he locks up Edward's 2 sons in a tower and we never hear of them again. And Richard III installs himself as King of England. That won't last for very long. He loses the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, and Henry Tudor pretty famously kills him in combat.
And then he's buried in a parking lot.
That's right. At least 40 days. Aston then had a steel prod crossbow because he very famously broke it during one of the sieges from the Duke of Norfolk. And so the Paston, Sir John Paston, was writing back to his family in London saying, please send another, we need more prods, we need more steel prods for our crossbowmen. We've just run out. But this is a crossbow here. And then just an example of some of the corals. It has just wooden vanes. These are quick and easy to produce, and being wood, they're not going to rot over time like, say, a feather wood with moths eating them. And then just a very nasty steel head that's kind of square. And the idea behind that is, since much of the cheap armor produced in this period were chainmail, was mail, the idea is it fits within one of the links of chainmail. And with enough pressure from this steel crossbow, is it can punch through one of those steel links, bust open that link, and then continue on to the man behind it. So these are very devastating, in some sense armor-piercing quarrels. In addition to, of course, the crossbow, I'm going to be armed with a sidearm with an arming sword for use during just hand-to-hand combat. Hopefully it doesn't come down to it where the archers have to fight, but we are still expected to be able to fight. And then instead of chainmail, I have a newer style of armor called a brigandine. Now this is pretty heavy. It looks just like leather on the outside with brass studs. But each of these studs are rivets that hold steel plates in here. And the idea behind this is it's a little bit more flexible than a knight's breastplate, backplate, which is our rigid armor. But then also the steel plates overlap, providing just that little bit much more of protection. So brigandine is my protection in addition to a standard helmet, just a salad helmet. Right now I'm just comfortably wearing my hat here because I'm just doing a little cooking. Now our long bowman, however, has a slightly different set of equipment.
So the main kind of difference in terms of a long bowman compared to a crossbowman is I have a much higher rate of fire, so I'm much more useful as a bowman because I can keep shooting longer than a crossbowman can before people can cross and get into me. So I'm even less expected to draw my sword and fight than a crossbowman. But what I have here is my longbow. This is a 95-pound draw weight ash longbow. It's just about as tall as I am. It's about 6 foot. Well, 6'6" when it's straight. I've used it enough that it's not quite straight anymore. But what it means by 95-pound draw weight, it takes about 95 pounds of force to draw this to its full draw. Now, if I was just shooting arrows back to back to back, I could fire this thing numerous times a minute. But the whole thing about a longbowman is you don't want to use them that way because you're going to exhaust them. And medieval battles could go on for a very, very long time. And having your archers have no arms left by the end is pretty useless. Okay, that's about your typical draw. One thing you can see that you often see in a lot of archer depictions is I have punched out the elbows to my doublet, giving a little more flexion there so I can do that draw weight well.
Did you want to warm up a little bit?
Yeah. So I'm going to take a couple of shots over here, maybe just actually using it if I was shooting at something to kill it, because mass matters a lot in terms of force, and force is what breaks armor. Momentum is what carries arrow through armor, but we have to break the armor first, and by that you need force, and by that you need weight. So there's a lot of ways to do your draw. Really depends on kind of how strong you are, how much of your body you need to put into drawing your bow. I can do kind of a simple draw like that. Oop. Still warming up, but you can tell those things go with quite a lot of momentum. This is what we call direct fire, so I'm shooting directly at what I'm going to see. Typically, I'm not going to do a lot of direct fire because if I'm using direct fire, that means someone's pretty close to me, and if someone's particularly there, I'm not going to get another shot at them before they can close in their distance and engage me. In fact, that's already probably a little too close. So usually I'm going to be aiming more of a kind of 45 degrees, and for that, kind of stepping in and pulling back is pretty useful. At a full 45 degree arc, I can put it about 200 yards, maybe a little bit further. Now you're gonna have a lot less force going that way because you're just relying on gravity to hold the arrow down rather than just the force of the bow. But it means you're sending arrows downrange, where it's a lot safer for you, the archer. Now I probably can't penetrate armor, particularly if I'm shooting indirectly. What I can hope for is I find a gap, I find a hole, I find one of the view places that don't have armor, and what I'm doing is I'm firing with a bunch of other archers and I'm relying on probability, basically. If we put enough arrows down into armored opponents, I'm going to find something somewhere to hit someone.
Well, if you're fighting the French, maybe you can even hit just a horse.
Or hit a horse, or there's not everyone is in full armor. Or maybe just someone was just lifting their visor up briefly to get a better view of the battlefield. Just a lot of luck. Luck on my part, unluck on their part. And by the time I get close to an aim shot, I might get one aim shot. Either I need to fall back or I need to move into my other weapons to defend myself. Because that's the whole thing about someone like me. I might have some armor, maybe a chest piece, but I don't want to have a lot of armor on because it's going to interfere with my ability to move my bow around. So how I fight is going to be very different from how a knight fights, because a knight has armor, and that armor lets you do things with the weapons that I don't want to do because it would expose my body to attack. So I'm going to be very fend-offy with my attacks. I'm going to wait till someone's on the ground and stab them with my dagger. I might have a buckler as a means of a shield.
Stuff.
Yeah, kind of a buckler to kind of defend myself as best as I can, because when you have armor, you can take big swings like this because it's okay. Your chest is your strongest part, whereas me, I want to, fend off, basically keep them at a distance because every part of me is vulnerable. And also I have these are called points. These are handy because if I do have to go back to my secondary weapon, these pop off super easy and they don't interfere with me being able to use my weapons, as opposed to a big gauntlet, which would. I had to go find that arrow.
Items kind of all put together and then it's wrapped in a hide on the outside.
And yeah, in Europe, you only see that kind of composite stuff for crossbows. In Central Asia, you start seeing that for whole bows, and they have very strong bows for their size. But we didn't really do it over here.
Yeah.
Well, because we had yew, which does the whole thing for you. But a thing we had in England was that we burned through all of our yew. They take a very long time to grow to get to the state where you need to use them for bow, and we've been using them for bows for a very, very long time, and we had just harvested so much of it that we had to get all of our yews from overseas, and unfortunately overseas is also full of people who are trying to use those bows against. So a lot of it, particularly, we got it from Germany, from France, and what the requirements was, if you are a merchant shipping things from those countries, in lieu of a customs fee, your customs fee was you had to bring a certain number of yew staves with you for use for the English military.
How do we get to the War of the Roses?
Common to yew these days is Osage orange, which is a New World tree. It actually grows around here. And it makes fantastic bows. But they did not have access to Osage orange until kind of the era of the bow had passed. But these days, a lot of folks will just use an Osage orange bow instead of yew. You get almost the exact same qualities at a fraction of the price, because Osage orange just grows a lot faster in a lot more places than yew does.
So that's what makes it go back to straight.
How many archers will Army have with them?
What's that?
How many archers will Army have with them?
Snap it half.
Depends on the size of the army.
Not as easily, does it?
English armies tended to have not that much cavalry, and we tended to have a lot more bowmen instead.
This one's
French armies tended to have very few longbowmen, tended to have more crossbowmen. Italian armies had lots of crossbowmen. It really depended on kind of what your population was able to provide you. Because how armies worked is, you were your liege. You would send out to all of your sub people in your realm, be like, all right,
so
you from this town, you from this county, raise your levies, provide this many people. And maybe they did, and maybe they didn't. In the War of the Roses, there was times where, like, a local baron would show up, and he had like 4 guys with him, because that's just who he was able to find in time for the battle. So if those guys are archers, great.
really like
Typically, you had to pledge a certain number of archers and a certain number of knights to your liege lord,
they go up against
and it
Indians.
tended to be about kind of 10 archers to 1 man-at-arms or knight. But again, it was just kind of, if you got a good harvest, if your people were busy, so on and so forth, whoever actually showed up to a battle,
It works wonders against.
it's easier to equip an archer, so there tended to be more archers than non-archers, but archers were also less useful in a military sense because they couldn't defeat armor. So it depends on the battle, really. In fact, the battle we're just about to reenact, or are about to do, the Battle of Barnet, was a thing where over-reliance on archers was actually a huge problem for the York side, because in how they set up the battle, they put their battle lines against the wind. So all of their archers were almost completely nullified because the wind was blowing against them. They couldn't get their arrows into the other enemy armor. So they had a lot of archers, and they couldn't do anything because they were shooting into the wind.
Very tiny ones like this. It's a lot worse than I ever thought when I was younger. When I started reading when I'm older.
Even though they weren't.
In fact, Caston is just a lawyer, and he would have a small
King Henry's
fighting force
flagship
that mans his
didn't last
castle.
very long.
And this is basically almost every bow, English longbow that is historical pattern, is patterned after those bows because they're the only bows we found. We found so many swords. We have basically 1 ship full of bows, and we have literally
You only have
3
like
period
you
arrows,
usually didn't
and that's
smoke
it.
well for us.
And the only reason we have one of them because it got stuck inside a church wall for 500 years, and they found it in like 1900s.
Oh my God! Well, I saw the Mary Rose in the museum.
Me? I'm a web designer.
Well, what's interesting about the Mary Rose, everyone's like, oh, they must have been, shipping bows to a land army. It's like, no.
I
In
was
fact,
a graphic
even
artist
after
when
the
I
adoption
started
of
off
firearms with land
years
forces,
ago,
bows were very
I
popular
was
as a ship-to-ship
interested
infantry
in
weapon.
college. I did
Because they didn't they
animation.
didn't lose their
And I
potency if
did
they got
like
wet.
10 and 20 second
Like gunpowder,
minute,
which
20
does.
seconds of animation.
And they're
available.
quicker. You can fire a lot more than that than loading a gun.
Coming through.